Hey everyone, welcome back to the PrimateCast. After the tune, you'll hear another origin story, this time Dr. Vernon Reynolds, on the making of a field site.
Evolution,
communication,
cognition,
conservation,
behavior.
primatology.
Typically primates.
Become the monkey.
Well, hello everyone, and once again, glad to have you back here on the PrimateCast. This is podcast number 62, and it's being released on Saturday, January the 29th, 2022. Today's podcast is taken from our International Primatology Lecture Series, Past, Present, and Future Perspectives of the Field. This is, as I mentioned previously, the brainchild of Dr. Michael Huffman, and like our normal programming, is brought to you by SciCasp. The main goal of the lecture series is to share some origin stories of experienced practitioners in primatology and its related fields. To do that, Mike Huffman's invited a revolving door of renowned primatologists to join us on the program and share their own stories with us. The PrimateCast is pretty happy to be able to share those with you, right here on the podcast. Now, unlike our normal interview format, these are recorded as part of the SciCasp seminar series in science communication, which is aimed at graduate students here at the Primate Research Institute and Wildlife Research Center of Kyoto University. So what you're going to hear is a lecture from each speaker that was recorded in Zoom. And it's generally showing slides, so there might be references to visual aids that are not available in podcast format. But for anyone wishing to find out more or see the speakers presenting their talks by video, you can check those out on the SciCasp YouTube channel, and that's CICASP. Today's lecture is the second in our series. It was recorded on July 7th, 2021. The timing of the podcast is actually pretty nice here because Vernon, our lecturer, is fresh off delivering a keynote at the delayed International Primatology Society conference because he was the most recent recipient of their Lifetime Achievement Award for 2020. Vernon spent most of his career as professor at Oxford University, and he's one of the most recognizable names in the field primatology, especially in the context of African great apes. In this lecture, he talks about the making of the Budongo Conservation Field Station, which has now been running for over 30 years and has become a real base of operations for various scientific explorations and conservation actions. So we hope you enjoy this episode from our International Primatology Lecture Series. We'll provide links to this and other lectures in our series in the show notes on the podcast website. Here's Mike Huffman introducing Vernon to get us started.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome, Vernon. It's a great pleasure and an honor to be able to introduce you to our second lecture in a series of many to come, I hope. And for all of you listening in, I'd like to let you know what a pleasure and what an honor it is to introduce you to Vernon, who I've known for many, many years, since 1984. I think the first International Primate Conference that I attended, which was in Nairobi, I ran into Vernon at a local restaurant. I had skipped over for a meal for dinner, and that's where I first actually got to talk to him. But I was able to read about his work. Started in 1962 when he first went to Uganda to study the Budongo chimps. And something special about the work that he was doing, 1962 was very, very early on in chimpanzee research. So he's one of the three people who were actually starting actively studying wild chimps in the 60s. The first, of course, is Jane Goodall, started in 1960. And then Adrian Cortland was working in West Africa, close to the site of Bosu. And then Vernon and his wife Frankie went to Uganda. So some of the earliest things that I learned about chimpanzees was from his work and Jane's work. And over the years, we keep bumping into each other at meetings and things. And maybe the last, since he started working at Budongo, when he set up his long-term project, which he'll introduce to us all today, as he started to publish more on the work at Budongo, we became closer and closer into contact because we had several common interests. I was able to visit. I sent a student over who spent some time there, Paula Pebsworth, and right now, in fact, a student from Oxford, where Vernon is from, is there with Kat Horbater, she's starting some field work there as well. So we've had a long friendship, a long connection with Budongo. And Vernon has really contributed a lot to what we know about chimpanzees, adding a different perspective from a different site, which is so important. So I'll end here and I'll let Vernon explain his fascinating work and the great contribution he's made to chimpanzee conservation. Vernon, I'll hand it over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Yes, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Very happy to be here, and I think it's the first time certainly the first time I've done a webinar to and with you folk from Japan. So that's a great honor. All right. So this is just the poster, which I think you've seen already. It's been up in your institute. It just shows our camp, this is what I'm going to talk about. It's going to be a friendly talk, not a highly scientific talk. This one, it's going to be informal. I'll just tell you a bit about how I got involved. This is what Mike asked me to do, so this is what I'm doing, and try and get a feel for what it's like, setting up a field station like this. Okay, so now let me see what happens if I press the down button. Nothing. I need to find how to move on to the next. This always happens. To the next slide. Anybody got any ideas?
Sorry, Brendan. Yeah, it should be if you. There you go.
I've got it. I don't know how I got it, but I got it. Okay. Yeah. So people sometimes ask, "How did you get into all this chimpanzee stuff?" And I never know really the answer to that one, but I think it was my son or daughter. One of them suggested that maybe it's something to do with the chimp statue. Well, he's actually quite small. He's about 15 inches tall. A bronze, here it is, and it shows a chimpanzee looking at a skull with a pair of calipers in his foot. He's actually sitting on some books, and from the other side, you can tell what the books are. One is Darwin, and the other is the Bible. There's a lot of thinking went into that, and I must have perhaps thought about it when I first saw it. I think I was 14 when I first came across it. And it was done by a great uncle of mine who took to sculpture. Here's a picture of him reclining on a very strange chair, or sort of halfway to being a chaise longue, but it's a sort of chaise court. Anyway, great uncle Hugo was my ancestor who did this statue. It's been copied many thousands or perhaps millions of times since, but he was the first. Now I plunged straight into my first bit of research, which was on rhesus monkeys for my PhD. And at that time, I was reading the Japanese literature. Here you see some of the people whose works I read, in Minishi, Mitani, Sugiyama, Kawai, Kawamura. I got their papers and read about them. They were looking at your lovely Japanese macaques, and I was looking at rhesus monkeys. That is actually a page from my old PhD, which I dug up on the shelf here. But I really I had this idea, rhesus monkeys were, and I was at the zoo in Whipsnade Zoo in England for that, part of London Zoo. So I wanted to get out to the wild, and I wanted to see chimpanzees really, if possible. And so Africa beckoned. And my wife and I, we were in this together. We got married around that time, and I sort of thought, let's go to Uganda. And here we are. We started out down here in Entebbe. We flew to Entebbe, and then we went up to Kampala. Makerere University is the university there. We stayed there. And then we borrowed or got hold of a short wheelbase Land Rover, and we drove up to the forests, which are marked in black on the western side, starting with the Budongo forest. Then we went down to Bugoma forest. We looked at Itwara, Semliki, which is lovely, Kibale. Along the Woodzori, we found forest. Kasioha, Kitomi, and then Kalinzu, that's your forest where you've just come back from. Furuichi has just returned from Kalinzu. We went there. I still have a photograph from the Kalinzu forest, and down to Bwindi, impenetrable forest in the south west corner of Uganda, which was very impenetrable, just like the name suggests. So then we went back and thought about it, where would we like to make our field station? And we said Budongo. It was great. It wasn't too hilly. And also there was in those days, there was a sawmill there, and the sawmill had, made roads so we could get there, get right into the forest. They even had a telephone and a postal service. It was lovely. So we went after a little short spelling camp. We went back to try and study chimps in Budongo. Now it's just a picture to show you Budongo forest, what it looks like from the satellite. Western Uganda, as you see, Lake Albert there is the great sheet of water just to the west of us. Then there's a rift here. This is 1,000 feet climb up from the lake, and on the top of the rift is, because this is the Rift Valley here, on the top of the rift is the Budongo forest. So there we are on the right, Frankie and me, as we were in 1962. I'm afraid time has worked its inevitable effects on physical appearance, but never mind, that's the way it goes. And that's the little house they gave us. It was the Forest Department rest house. They gave us a little house and said, there's nobody there, you can live in it. So we had a nice little house. I could actually see Frankie just there looking out over the forest. Well, it's the first time I've noticed that. After we'd done our study, we were followed by two Japanese researchers. So for this talk, I've spotlighted them. Here is my old friend Yuki Sugiyama, who I would love him to be watching this talk if he's around. I hope he's there. And he came along and in 65 or thereabouts, I might get the date slightly wrong, and studied chimps at Budongo, the same chimps we studied, but he named them, and he got much further with his studies than we were able to do in our first study. He actually gave each chimp a name, which we never managed to do. And then the second, I haven't been able to find a photo of Suzuki, although I've tried. He came along and he was the first one to see infanticide in chimpanzees, and he managed to photograph it. And if you find his original paper, you'll find photographs of a big male holding a dead baby chimp and eating it. Well, we came back from Uganda in 1965 and wrote a book about it. I really enjoyed writing that book. It's a lovely chatty book. If you manage to get hold of it, you'll enjoy it. It's a bit dated now, but it describes the trip, and it's a sort of Romance of Africa type of book. But there's a lot of information about chimps in it, and it was the first study of forest living chimpanzees. So in that sense, we were pioneers. Jane Goodall beat us to it, but she wasn't in a tropical rainforest. She was in an area with some grassland as well as some tree cover. And of course, she became immensely famous at Gombe. Now, unfortunately for us, not long after we left Uganda, a certain gentleman here by the name of Idi Amin took power in Uganda. and really, I mean, you could say single-handedly destroyed the country. He made life very, very difficult for anybody he didn't like, up to the point of torturing and killing them. So he was a nasty bit of work, and I didn't want to go. As a matter of fact, I was invited to go back by, not by, I didn't get him on the line himself, but his number two man invited me to come to Uganda because they'd read the book, and I said no, because by then I had two children to think about, so I had no more trips to Uganda. But then as time went by, I heard that chimps, you see, Uganda had broken down. I heard about chimp babies being trafficked, being poached, being caught, the mother's killed, baby put in the back of the car, drive to Entebbe airport, send it somewhere, get money, get money. And I thought, this is not good enough. So I lie there in my bed. I'm not sure if that's actually me. And I thought about going back and even maybe set up a field station. But you know, you think about doing these things, what do you do about it? So I didn't know where to start, but I was pretty determined to do something. And I'd heard all about these big NGOs, you know, World Wildlife Fund and so on. And I thought, well, they will love to give me money for a field station. I want to travel out there. I need money for the airfare. I didn't want to use my own money. You know, I wanted to try and raise the money from sources, as we all do in primatology. Anyway, got absolutely nowhere with the big organizations which we know about, which have much money, but they have committed their money in other directions. Nobody has got any spare money, but I needed the money to build a field site, which I was determined to do, and employ staff, of course, to keep it running. And that means ongoing money, quite apart from travel for myself and other people. Well, I got some help eventually when people heard about it. And it was the smaller organizations, lovely little organizations which support conservation, came to my rescue and gave me £100, £200, £500. It was terrific. I felt, you know, at last the gates were starting to open. And then after about a year, I managed to raise proper money to do something a bit bigger from the ODA, which is our British government Overseas Development Administration, Department for International Development it's called now, which had a forestry section, and it was through forestry that I managed to raise the funding to get the thing going. And later on, after British government said you've had enough, Norway came in, and NORAD has also a big interest, as you know probably, in forestry, so they came along and they helped. So I went back to Uganda and we got to Entebbe in 1990, and straight away I was told to go and see a young couple who had these two baby chimps in their garden. They were looking after them, feeding them. These two little babies were taken from Budongo forest, shoved in the back of a car, taken to Entebbe airport, traveled to Dubai, where there was an order for them, for pets, confiscated. Most, of course, got through, but these two were confiscated at Dubai airport, put back on the plane, sent back to Uganda, and they were in Entebbe when I met them there. Lovely pair of little baby chimps from Budongo, but of course, terribly tragic that trade was going on. Fortunately, it's stopped now, pretty much stopped. I very much hope it's completely stopped, but I doubt it. Well, the first thing to do. I realized my short visits to Uganda, I went for 2 or 3 weeks. Actually, I went for 6 weeks originally, but then I had shorter trips. Whereas the first thing I had to do was get a field director for the project. And it happened that this guy, Chris Bacanita, was available. He had just finished his master's degree at Makerere, and Professor Pomeroy pointed him to me and said, Chris is a good man. He will help you and set you up. And there he is with his wife and newborn child. I think that might be a little bit after 1990, but not long after. Chris married Peace, and they had a baby. But that's Chris, our first director of the project. And he said, Vernon, you can't run a project on chimpanzees without field assistance, so I'll get you some. So between one trip and the next, he managed to have 6 field assistants, of whom you see 2 there. Zephyr is Zephyr Kiwede, who has been with our project right up to this year. Unfortunately, he retired this year. And Joseph, who is still working on chimps, but with Jeanette Wallace in the Kasokwa region. They're 2 of our early field assistants. And there you see, they've got the binoculars, and they have the check. We used to take our records on check sheets. You can probably see here, Joseph is holding a board, a clipboard, and the other side of that will be his check sheet, and he's got his pen in his hand. That's how we recorded data about the chimps. So 1990, I would say, was the year when we founded what was then called the Budongo Forest Project. And well, everybody has a picture like this. It's just awful. Once the rain comes down, the roads turn into a sort of quagmire, and you get stuck. But we were always great. People came to help. That's Chris with trying to do something for the Land Rover and being helped by someone. And then 1990, back in 1990, to my amazement, and it really was totally amazing, I met with a tracker who came with us in 1962. He was still there in 1990. A lovely guy called Manweri came from Bwamba down in the southwest, and he was still living there, but he was an old man. He couldn't see properly, but he said, Vernon, welcome, Bwana, he called me. Bwana, I'm coming with you. And he just never let me go after that. He stayed with me the whole time I was there. And there is Manweri again with Chris. Now, this is unfortunate, you see. Budongo was the big mahogany forest for Uganda. Tons and tons of mahogany, beautiful mahogany, were exported, and it was done in a sustainable way by the British foresters. They had a 60-year cycle to go around the forest, taking the older trees. And when the British left with Idi Amin coming to power, it all fell apart. Illegal logging got started then, and by the 1990s, it was everywhere. This is a pit sawing site. A pit is dug, a tree is felled, it's raised up onto the poles, and vertically it is sawn into planks. The planks are put on a truck and sent out of the forest. And we hit that full on when we came back to Budongo. The mahogany trade, 2 or 3 trucks of mahogany a day going out of the forest. Totally unsustainable. All the forest, all the mahogany has gone, and it went in about 5 or 10 years, it was all gone. Well, life was simple in those days. We managed to get a stove, you see it, and boil some water and perhaps boil some eggs. I don't know what's in that little pot, maybe a bit of chicken. The guy sitting there with the blue trousers was our cook. So simple life. And the house which Chris had found for us to turn into our headquarters looked like this in 1990. It was the remains of one of the sawmill houses. The sawmill was disbanded and abandoned, I should say, during the Idi Amin period. Everything went wrong, and you see the two ladders there. We had already started renovating in 1990. This was going to be our project headquarters. And there were some other little outhouses which we had to take to bits. These were the staff quarters, and we managed to make some nice staff quarters. Then along came Andy Plumtree. He was our first Budongo, otherwise known as British or non-Ugandan director. So we made him a co-director with Chris Bacanita. They were co-directors for 6 years and ran the project together. Andy was a superb scientist. He had his PhD done on gorillas, and he was the guy who led the scientific research, stayed in Budongo for 6 years until he moved on. He's now a very senior man in WCS, working out of Cambridge. And then our chief builder was Richard Odongto, a great guy from northern Uganda with a fantastic sense of humor, hugely hardworking, and on top of all that, he managed to look after the funding of the building operation very honestly, and managed to get everything cheap for us. My son Jake came out to help with renovations. You see him there removing some old wiring from, you see, they used to have electricity once upon a time, and so Jake was doing this cutting out all the old wires, as you see there. And then all of a sudden there was a flash and a mighty bang, and smoke started pouring out of the ceiling. And we realized that there was still electricity in those wires, and we couldn't understand it. And then someone said, oh, well, of course, you're connected to the generator. Well, we said, generator? Yes, they said, go down to the river. Went down to the river. At the river, we found a little old man who had been every day, he started the generator for 15 minutes, which used to be the one for the sawmill until the sawmill packed up in the 1970s. And every day since then, he was hoping to get paid. So he came and started, and he started it just when Jake was cutting the wires. So poor Jake nearly died, the house nearly burnt down, and we nearly lost everything, but we didn't. Then our daughter, Janie, came out. It was sort of family operation, first of all. And Janie made a lovely film of the project as it came along, and the chimps. She's there filming the chimps. So it was absolutely lovely in those days. We had to have a show, but I'm glad to say neither my son nor my daughter had to build that. We got a hard-working Ugandan to do it. The cho is the latrine they use in Uganda, a very fine way of doing a toilet. Once you've dug the hole, you put boards over it, and on those boards you set concrete, cover it with a cement screed, and then make a hole in the middle, and there's your toilet. And it's very good, and they last for years and years and years. No smell, nothing, if you keep them clean. Fantastic. And then disaster. You can see what happened. Those are the new staff houses. We had just built them. They were not yet occupied by our staff. And there was a tree with a branch overhanging those houses, and the figs, it was a fig tree, and the figs kept dropping off the tree and banging down onto the iron sheets which formed the roofs of the houses. And the people who lived in them said, we can't sleep at night because these figs keep dropping. Please get rid of that tree. So we called in a man to fell the tree. And what did he do? He felled it on the houses after having said he was this brilliant, skilled tree feller, and he would fell it into the forest. So actually, he felled one of the branches directly down on, and we lost 3 houses. So we had to do them again. I was there at the time, so it rather sticks in my memory. And it's not a photo I really like to look at. So let's move on. That was the picture we started with, wasn't it, on the poster at the front? It's the thing in the middle is called a banda. It's a wonderful thing. You find them in Uganda, probably all over East Africa, maybe elsewhere. Straw roof, low brick wall, open for the air to pass through. You can't see them, but there are chairs inside. You sit around talking and drinking beer and have a good time in the evening in the banda. Most places have them in Uganda. And that's one of the renovated houses. It's not actually the one you saw before, but it's that's what the houses look like after renovation. We renovated 2 houses originally. Now we have about 10. And there's me and Frankie in the forest in 1992. Frankie came out to join us and see how the project was going along. And incidentally, she's somewhere downstairs watching it now. Well, the first thing we needed was, well, no, not the first thing. The second thing we needed was a new director because Chris had to go. And in 1996, we got a guy who had already done a study of chimps at Budongo. No, of the forest. He didn't study chimps. He was a forester, and he made a study of the forest at Budongo. And then he was so keen on Budongo, and he wanted to stay on. And he was such a brilliant guy. We said, okay, we appointed him as the new director, and he still is the top man at Budongo, although he's a senior man in Makerere University now, but he comes to see us once a month in Budongo. And then we got this question. I hope you can read it. Who do you belong to? Now, this question came from the forest department, the people who owned the land that we had built our camp on. And we were busy working away, studying chimps. Students were arriving. We had money. And then the forest department said to me, the head of the forest department in Kampala said to me one day, because I always used to go and report on progress to him, who do you belong to? Well, it's quite a question to get asked, and we hadn't really thought too much about it. We thought, well, we're doing okay. But you have to belong to someone if you want to stay in a foreign country. You have to be in the institutional network of that country. Were we part of Oxford University? No. Were we part of Makerere University? No. Were we part of the Forest Department or the National Forest Authority? No. The Zoological Society of Scotland was providing us with money in those days. They still do. Our core funding comes from Edinburgh Zoo. But we weren't a part of Edinburgh Zoo. We were really just an independent project studying chimps. And that wasn't good enough. We needed a link. And I wanted the station to be Ugandan anyway. I didn't want it to be an expat project, expatriate project. I didn't want it to be a British project. I wanted it to be a Ugandan project. So we became Ugandan. In 2007, Fred Babwatera, the guy you saw just then, sat down with members of the Forest Department, other branches of the Ministry of Environment, and whoever necessary, and we hammered out a constitution for ourselves with a board of directors, and we became a Ugandan NGO, which was exactly what I had wanted, and Fred did it. But they said, you're a project, you can't be an NGO. Projects are not allowed. So we had to change our name, and we called ourselves the Budongo Conservation Field Station and changed our logo a little bit. So instead of saying Budongo Forest Project, it now says Budongo Conservation Field Station. Okay, so this is Gershom. Now, I want to mention him especially because I showed you a photo of Zephyr earlier. He was one of our first field assistants, and so was Gershom, right back from 1990 to the present day. Gershom is still at the project. He knows so much about the forest and the chimps. I think all of us who've done field work know how extremely valuable it is to have someone like that who knows everything. And any question you have, however small, you might have one leaf, you go to Gershom, what tree is this? He tells you. And then, of course, I've been talking about chimps, but we haven't seen any yet. Our second adult, when I first started, I never really got, well, I have got photos, but not so good. Because we couldn't get close to them in the early days. Our second alpha male was Dwayne, named incidentally, and Mike will know just who I'm talking about, after Dwayne Quiet, who used to visit our project in those days. I have to say the late Dwayne Quiet, because he just unfortunately died, a great primatologist. Anyway, Dwayne, the alpha male, was named after him, and there he is. And then he was followed by Nick, who was a great male too, but he lasted several years until quite recently. He was never quite the same caliber as Dwayne. He wasn't quite so tough, you know. He was tough enough to be alpha, but not tough enough really to frighten the neighboring group, for example. He used to run away. So he had some weak points. And he's been succeeded again now more recently by a chimp. I think it's Hawa at the moment, I must check, but I don't have a photo of him. However, I want to show you this one, Chimps at Camp. We have, in those first 5 years, from 1990 to 95, we got to know every chimp, and we had begun to habituate them. The adult males get habituated first, and then after them, usually some of the younger males, and then slowly, the adult females, and last of all, the mothers with their infants. And by now, by about, I would think, by the year 2000, we had habituated all the chimps in our community. Now, when I say our community, I mean the Sonso community. And our camp is the Sonso camp, and they're named after the river Sonso, which runs past our camp. We've since then, during the 2000s, we've habituated a second community to the north called the Waibira community. But for the first 10, 15 years, it was just the Sonso community. And of course, with our camp being in the, as we later discovered, our camp was right in the middle of their range. Their range was to the north, south, east, and west of us. We were slap in the middle of their range. I mean, they were decent about it. They didn't complain. And eventually they came out and said, okay, you can live here. And they walked across the camp from one side to the other. And nowadays, if you go to Budongo, you're pretty sure that one day or another, chimps will come around camp. So we have a good relationship. We have now raised our distance. Minimum distance was 7 meters. Never get closer to a chimp than 7 meters, because they will come close to you if you want, but we don't let that happen. And we've raised it to 10 meters, advice to do with COVID, which, touch wood, we have avoided so far, and we've taken very many measures to avoid that. But I'm jumping ahead a bit. I don't want to lose my track. Now, I just want to say about the community, because as time passed in Budongo, running the camp, running the Land Rover up and down the road past the village people would look at us and we would wave, and they sometimes waved and sometimes they didn't. The kids always waved, but the grown-up men didn't wave so much. And we started to realize that we weren't helping the community. We were being pretty selfish. So we instituted a series of measures which would enable us to get to know the community, work with the community, mix with the community, not just buy their chickens and their eggs, but also talk to them, sit down with them. And we started up a scholarship program. So the clever children from the schools, the ones that the head teacher said were the top children, could get a scholarship, and it came with a little bit of money and as you see, a piece of paper, and there we are. I don't know if that's about 2003. I can't see the date, unfortunately, because the pictures are in the way. We started, there's Fred on the left, whose idea it was. And the three children, I only know one of them, but in the middle is Zephyr, our head field assistant at the time, and posing for their photo in front of our renovated house 1. That was the main house, the one you saw at the start in a dilapidated state. So that was our first move towards the community, and it was so important, very much appreciated. And you do one little thing and word goes around. Well, we also went into the local schools and we talked to the children about chimpanzees and conservation, a word they had never heard and couldn't understand, and about everything we could think of. Or we got them to draw pictures. We even got them to exchange scrapbooks with our children in the local school here in England. But I don't know what you can see. If you can see what I can see, you can see starey eyes. And those children are not like our English children, and probably not like your Japanese children. They are scared and frightened. What's the big man going to do? And so I could give them a talk for 15 minutes about chimpanzees, and they would ask me, what's that white hair growing on your face? Why are you so old? And they would say, what is the Queen of England? Tell us about the Queen. So I realized after a while that you can stand and talk to those children. They've never heard anything like it. They're not thinking about they're scared. You might do something and they might get punished if they move. But slowly, slowly, those children started to relax. And I think after 2 or 3 years, 5 years, we could go into schools, and we do now. We go into schools and they know us and we know them. We give them some support. We give them some money. We made concrete floors for some of them because they only had dirt. We gave some of them benches, and if we've got any spare money, we improve their latrines, etc. That's what happens. And then you get going, the community. But having said all that nice, friendly, lovely stuff, it isn't like that. Human-wildlife conflict. That lovely chimp, one of our best males, Jambo, went into the sugarcane field to get some sugarcane, and a guard of the sugar with a spear killed him. Not long after that, we decided we needed a vet, and we were very fortunate. We obtained a lovely, very skilled and superb vet called Carolina Simwe, who was newly graduated from Makerere University. She came up to Budongo and she's been with us ever since. And she's the person who does our vet work. Well, it's a messy business. The farmers around Budongo, quite apart from spears, they have a use of the trap, which is actually illegal, but the word illegal doesn't mean much because there's no police. The trap is set around people's gardens to stop crop raiding. That's the big problem, crop raiding. That's one of the big problems. And a chimp got caught in a trap, and there's Carol on the right, and she's been helped by some vet interns, because we get interns coming up from Makerere for training. I don't know what she's had to do there. She's removed the trap, certainly, but I can't see quite what's going on. Anyway, in some cases, unfortunately, you have to amputate, but most times a chimp can have its wound dressed and they survive. Sometimes they lose the use of a hand or a foot. They might even lose the whole foot in the trap. But they do usually survive and sometimes even get the use of their hand or foot back. Now, much more common than the trap is the snares. These snares, here we are talking about snares, but these snares are very real and they're being put in the forest, Budongo forest, every day. I wish I could say that had stopped, but it hasn't. It still happens. And every month I get the statistics from Budongo, how many snares they've removed. These are our snare removers. Those are the snares. And there's a chimp with a snare on its hand, Kana. Can you see its hand is curved round? This is what we call claw hand. It happens to humans as well. And if they get, of course, in humans, it's usually people get their hand caught in a door or a window and somehow squeezed, and the tendons and muscles and nerves of the wrist get destroyed and the hand goes into a claw shape. And there, that poor old chimp has got the. Now, it may bite it off, it may get it off, but whether it will recover its hand, I don't know. So there's our snare removal team in 2013. Ex-hunters themselves turned conservationists. So they knew where to find snares, how do people put snares on. And surprisingly, they were not ostracized in the village. They still lived in the village with the people putting the snares. They were known to be snare removers. I thought they might get into trouble, but they didn't. Ugandans are able to cope with that. So we decided, what should we do? And we called a meeting of the hunters. There they are on the left. These are not our staff. These are village people. They came to camp. They thought maybe we'll get money. I don't know. They came to camp. They'd heard we wanted a meeting of all the people who put snares in the forest. You will not be punished. So they came to the meeting and we explained to them, we will give you goats if you stop putting snares in the forest. Go away and think about it. If you have goats, we'll give you 2 nanny goats, 2 female goats each. We'll bring a male goat round. You can make a goat herd. You can have meat forever. Just stop putting snares in the forest and getting the wild animals. Keep goats. And it was very successful. I would think 2/3 of all hunters signed up for that. They promised that they would not put snares in the forest if we gave them goats. And also we said, we'll bring the vet round and look after your goats. So we had a lot of success with that. Some didn't want to have anything to do with it. They smelt a rat or detected a trap of some sort. There was no trap, it was a genuine move. Unfortunately, I have to say, some of those guys cheated on the scheme, and we had to introduce a rule that once they found cheating, putting snares, as well as having goats, they lost their privileges, they lost their goats, and they would never be allowed to take part in the scheme again. So there was a little stick as well as a carrot for that scheme. Well, first, 40 years after I wrote my first book, which you saw earlier, there was a new one. And there we see, if you get that book or find it in your library, you'll find lots of information about the Budongo chimps up to year 2005, when I handed over as scientific director to Klaus Superbuhler from Switzerland, who is still our scientific director today. Sometimes you don't know what's going to happen, well, a lot of the time actually, and on this occasion I didn't know I would be drawn into research myself, because I'd been largely managing the project. It's a full-time job, you know, when you set up a project and manage it. But I did a little bit of behavioral research, but mainly not. And then there was something going on. We saw it all through the 1990s, and we didn't know what it was. That's a young raffia tree. I couldn't get a big one because you couldn't fit it in. But can you see the tree is growing here? These are the raffia leaves, young ones. Those leaves grow enormous, 60 feet long, and they're used for raffia string. It grows in swamp forest in Uganda. And when the tree dies, the top falls off and the trunk becomes hard, very hard. But the trunk doesn't fall down, it stays up like a sort of chimney. And the chimps make a hole in the bottom of the tree with their teeth and their fingers. They gradually work away, they work hard to make this hole. And this is, they then put the hand, when they can, they get a finger or a hand eventually, they put the hand in the hole, pull out the pith, the dead pith from the inside of the raffia palm, and chew it. They put it in their mouth and chew it, chew it, chew it, chew it, chew it, and spit it out. And here is a spat out bolus, or we call them a wodge. That's my pocket knife to give you an idea of size. A wodge of chewed raffia pith. And that's there for a namby. There's a hole here, and they're getting their hands in it. Sometimes two chimps feed together. That's a couple of our chimps feeding on the pith. Why make a hole? Same picture. Why make the hole? Why chew the pith? What are they getting? So we collected wodge samples. I brought them back to the UK. And the University of Brighton, which is quite near where I live, had facilities for measuring the mineral elements. We wanted to see if there's any minerals in there, because we knew that animals and chimps, all primates, eat minerals. Andrew Lloyd, Professor Andrew Lloyd at the University of Brighton, did the analysis, masterminded it. And you see there, I won't go into it, the way that the samples were analyzed. And we found the answer. There was salt in the pith. We had no idea. They were getting sodium chloride, a high level of sodium, and we also found chlorine in the neighboring surrounding pith. So sodium chloride was being formed in the pith. And there is just a slide from my paper, or our paper, I should say, 2009. And Mike wrote to me and said, well done, Vernon, that's a very interesting study. On the left, the big bar here, this is sodium, levels of sodium in the raffia only. And this is all the rest of the diet, very little sodium in it. And we've never found anything else since with such a high level of sodium as the raffia. Well, I'm reaching the end of my talk here, and I just wanted to say, you mentioned that we do have a website. Just put in Budongo, or there's the full website there. That's the front page of the website. It probably needs a bit of updating, but it's a good site. You can find a lot about our work, who we are, what we've published, and all the rest of it on the website. So I do encourage you to have a look at it. And as always, we have to acknowledge our funding sources. Our main funding today comes from Scotland, the Royal Zoological Society of Scotland, otherwise called the Edinburgh Zoo. And we also have a lot of help now from Oakland Zoo in the States. Plus, the Arcus Foundation has been tremendously generous. Darwin Initiative, National Geographic, Conservation International, and so on. And my own work, in fact, on the raffia pith was funded by the Mohammed bin Zayed Fund for Conservation of Species. So I believe that's the end of my talk. It is. Thank you all very much for listening.
You have been listening to the PrimateCast, a podcast series dedicated to all things primatology and wildlife research, to the conservation of species, and to the dissemination of scientific knowledge. The podcast is brought to you by the Center for International Collaboration and Advanced Studies in Primatology at the Kyoto University Primate Research Institute. Visit us online at theprimatecast.com and follow our social media feeds on Facebook and Twitter at the PrimateCast.